Parshat VaYigash. Before we begin, I just want to let everybody know that this week we did not have class. I did not want to leave, everybody without a Dvar Torah to say for the Shabbos table. So in this week's Parshat VaYigash, we're going to skip to when the brothers finally found out that Yosef, in fact, is the king of Egypt, is in fact their brother Yosef. And when they found out that the king of Egypt is their brother, they were so embarrassed by the fact what they have done to him, that they sold him, that they didn't even know what to say to him. And he calmed them down right away by asking, "Is my father still alive?" And in this week's parsha, from the story of Yosef and his brothers, we learn what it means to be embarrassed in front of the person who we're guilty in front of, who is Hashem. When the Mirza Hashem, our ancient traditions have it that there's going to be a Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, right? And when Mashiach comes, he's going to judge each and every one of us to see whether we are worthy to come and join the new Messianic era. What are we going to say to him if we're not ready? Lo alenu. And just like Yosef, when he said Ani Yosef, Hashem will also tell us Ani Hashem, and all of our answers will be answered. So too all the brothers' answers were answered as well. So now we move forward to when Yosef calls over his father to come to Egypt to see him for the first time after 22 years. And his father, instead of embracing him, hugging him, and crying that he didn't see him for so long, he started to say Kriyat Shema while hugging him. What he was trying to do was he was channeling his emotions of love and happiness for his son and pushing it over to Hashem. It's kind of similar to the idea of when a baby boy gets his circumcision, his brit milah, is a good time to channel that scream of pain to Hashem, and a special time to pray to him. When a baby cries, it's that time to use him as a shliach to cry to Hashem and basically beg for whatever what we need in our lives. So too, Yaakov here is channeling that emotion towards his son to Hashem. And then when Pharaoh finally meets Yaakov and the brothers, he realizes that Yosef, who was initially a slave, is actually from a royal family, from a great grandson of Avraham Avinu, who everybody knew. The whole world knew who Avraham Avinu was. So Pharaoh there felt comfortable with having Yosef in rule of Egypt, because at least he was of royal blood. And we have to understand one thing, that there's a rule in Egypt that no slave can ever become a king, which is going against all odds for Yosef. So Paysach says like this: Pharaoh said to Yaakov, "How many are the years of your life?" And Yaakov said to Pharaoh, "I have lived 130 years. The years of my life were few and bad, and they have not reached the years of my fathers." We see from this pasuk that Pharaoh Pharaoh asked Yaakov, "How old are you?" And Yaakov kind of gave a little complaint about his life and his hardships. The Dasikanim cites the Midrash that Yaakov was punished for saying that his days of his life were few and bad. Because of this lack of appreciation, the words of this pasuk, of the pasuk that when Pharaoh asked Yaakov his age, and the response that Yaakov gave to Pharaoh was 33 words. And being that it was 33 words, we learn from here that his years of life was reduced by 33 years. It should have been at minimum 175, like his father's. But since he complained, it was reduced by 33, which was the same amount of words of the pasuk that Pharaoh asked how old he were, and the same amount of words of Yaakov responding back, complaining about his life. 33 words in total. Now the question is, how come Yaakov's life was reduced by a number of years in what Pharaoh asked? You understand the question? Yes. The question was, in verse number 8, Pharaoh asked, how old are you? And he answered back, I had short bad years. And because of the amount of words in his question and the amount of words in his answer is reduced by the number of his years. But the question is, what's the big deal that he has to reduce the amount of years in Paro's question? What did Paro do wrong? The answer is, a famous answer, one of the many answers, is that if a person is going through such hardships in life, the other person shouldn't ask them, how are you feeling or how are you doing? Obviously he's not feeling so good, and the person shouldn't remind him of his hardships. That's one answer. A second answer is, which is probably my favorite answer, is that Yaakov has such a hard life, and he really had not positive feedback according to his life, because he went through a lot of hardships. His brother tried to kill him, his uncle tried to swindle him, and this swindled him for maybe 14 years. He was away from his father for 20 years. He was away from his father for 14 plus years, and away from his son for 20 plus years. So his life wasn't the best life. And because he didn't take it to the positive, that emotion, that stress was getting to him, making him look older than what he actually was. And because he made himself look older than what he actually was, is why Paro had to ask him how old you were, and therefore, because of the look of how old he actually looked, which is a lot older than he actually was why his years was reduced. So from this we learned that, if anybody goes through certain hardships of life, that they should always be positive about it, because stress alone can kill a person. And we all know that the number one cause of disease and, shortened of life all boils down to stress. So I just want to say a few short words from the Zera Shimshon, and we're going to end this class. Zera Shimshon brings down a pasuk that says, Yosef said to his brothers, I am Yosef. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, because they were left disconcerted before him. They were embarrassed in front of him. And Zera Shimshon comments, brings down a pasuk from the Bereshis Rabbah. It says, woe is to us from the day of judgment. Woe is to us from the day of rebuke. Just like his brothers were ashamed in front of Yosef's face, so too we will be ashamed in front of Hashem's face when he says, I am Hashem. And we're going to be so embarrassed to admit the guilt that we are accused of. But isn't it obvious how difficult a time we will have when Hashem himself gives us rebuke? Do we really need to learn this concept from Yosef and his brothers? The answer is, in reality, the brothers recognized Yosef that moment he revealed himself to him. But they couldn't say a word to him, because they were so embarrassed. But why were they so embarrassed? Having seen their brother a number of times, going back and forth, bringing Binyamin, coming back to Egypt, getting food from them, they saw him so many times, and they didn't even recognize who he was. That also played a role in how embarrassed they were. And I heard a nice reason why they didn't recognize their brother Yosef. Remember, this is 20 years later, and he has a beard. He was a young person, 17 years old, and he has a beard now. He's older. He's more buffed now. He's different looking. But we also don't forget that Yosef was a spitting image of Yaakov. So Yosef looked exactly like Yaakov. So how couldn't they recognize who he looked like? So I saw a nice answer was because, sometimes when you're looking for your phone everywhere and it just happens to be in your hand the whole time, or when you're looking for your pen and everywhere and you just happen to be in your ear the whole time, on your ear. So too with them, that it was so obvious that this was Yosef, but they just couldn't believe it, that Yosef was sitting in front of him. They had no recollection. That they were under the impression that Yosef was in jail or was a slave elsewhere, and they couldn't believe that he would be a king. Because they couldn't believe that he could have been a king, that mind blocked what they're looking at, and they couldn't recognize Yosef. So once he admitted the fact that he was in fact Yosef, that's when they were embarrassed and saying, wow, we didn't even recognize you this whole time. And so too, again, coming back to us, that when Hashem opens up our eyes and says that I am Hashem, and this was my commandments, we're going to be so embarrassed and say that I knew this the whole time and I still didn't follow you. So the Zera Shimshon is here telling us that woe to us from the day of judgment, woe to us from the day of rebuke, from the terrible embarrassment we will experience at that time. While it's true that in this world sins don't always look like sins, we can delude ourselves into thinking that the wrong things we do are not that bad. On the day of judgment, we will recognize the truth about our actions we took on earth. And then there will be terrible shame and embarrassment over the fact that we didn't face the truth about the way we lived our lives while we still had the chance. And of course, by then, unfortunately, it'll be too late. Chazak Baruch.
Chazak Baruch.